General Lynch, thank you for being here. Thank you for your thoughtful and patient responses to my colleagues' questions. In the brief time that I have today, I'd like to discuss recent reports of some disturbing and dangerous and inhumane prisoner transport conditions in this country. Just last week, the New York Times, in a big story that I put together with the Marshall Project, shed light on abuses that harm thousands of prisoners into vans by private contractors on a pay-per-mile basis. It's the same way we pay for shipping cargo in this country, and any retailer will tell you that it pays to ship in bulk. But we're not talking about pallets of laundry detergent. We're talking about human beings. We're talking about American citizens, and no matter their crime, they deserve better than the way that these transport services are treating them. The story that ran on July 6th, New York Times, recounts the horrific deaths of several individuals, one of them Stephen Gallick from South Florida. And I'll just quote briefly from the story. In July 2012, Stephen Gallick, the former owner of a home remodeling business, was living in Florida when he was arrested on an out-of-state warrant for failing to pay child support. Mr. Gallick, 46, had come to the end of a long downward spiral, overcoming a painkiller addiction, only to struggle with crippling anxiety. Now he was to be driven more than 1,000 miles to Butler County, Ohio, where his ex-wife and 3 children lived, to face a judge. Like dozens of states and countless localities, Butler County outsources the long-distance transport of suspects and fugitives. He was loaded into a van run by Prisoner Transportation Services of America, the nation's largest for-profit extradition company. Crammed around him were 10 other people, both men and women, all handcuffed and shackled at the waist and ankles. They sat tightly packed on seats inside a cage with no way to lie down to sleep. The air conditioning faltered amid 90-degree heat. Mr. Gallick soon grew delusional, keeping everyone awake with a barrage of chatter and odd behavior. On the 3rd day, General Lynch, the van stopped in Georgia, and one of 2 guards on board gave a directive to the prisoners. Only body shots, one prisoner said she heard the guard say. The others began to stomp on Mr. Gallick, 2 prisoners said. The guards said later in depositions they had first noticed his slumped, bloodied body more than 70 miles later in Tennessee. A homicide investigation lasted less than a day, and the van continued its journey. The cause of death was found to be undetermined. This is, his ex-wife said, someone's brother, father, and it's like nobody even cared. So, General Lynch, paying transport contractors on a per-mile, prisoner-per-mile basis incentivizes overcrowding, overheated van cargo holds, taking shortcuts on officer training, skipping stops to arrest drivers and to relieve passengers. Each investment into humane conditions and treatment of prisoners cuts into the profits of these companies. And despite a federal law that passed in 2000, known as Gianna's Act, these private transport companies operate with virtually no oversight. Prisoners have died from untreated medical emergencies because officers have no medical training or just don't seem to care. Prisoners have been assaulted and raped while cramped into the back of a van just feet from the transport officers who are responsible for their safety. And reports show that prisoners often do not receive adequate food and water. The vans are unsanitary, and prisoners do not get opportunities to use the bathroom. In addition to these poor conditions, the transport system is vulnerable to prisoner escapes. Now, no American should be subject to this treatment, but I would like to state clearly for the record that many of the people transported in the system have not even been convicted of any crime. Gianna's Act set out minimum standards for transport companies, including guard training, the proper use of restraints, CPR, navigation, defensive driving, maximum driving times, etc. But in spite of these minimum standards, the companies are not being held to account. And since the passage of Gianna's Act, it's been reported that at least 56 prisoners have escaped for-profit transport vehicles. 16 committed new crimes while on the run, and what is most shocking of all, the Act has been enforced by the Department of Justice one time in 16 years. One time in 16 years. So, General Lynch, I just ask, what else can be done for us to focus on an issue that we were so concerned about here in Congress 16 years ago that we passed legislation, but that legislation seemingly goes unnoticed or certainly unenforced. And I'll finish just by pointing out a quote from the chief operating officer of one of these companies who said, well, it's regulated by the Department of Justice, but I've never seen anybody come out to actually check on us. What can we do to address this problem that's resulting in the result of which is that our communities are made less safe and these prisoners are treated inhumanely.
Well, Congressman, you raise an extremely important issue because, of course, the treatment of all those within the criminal justice system at every point throughout that system has to be humane and fair, regardless of their status, whether they're convicted or not. And certainly pretrial is just as important a situation and a status as well. I'm not familiar with the situation that you've encountered, but I am happy to review that, and I would hope that our staffs could continue the discussion about this issue.
I would be grateful.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yeah, I would be happy to yield.
I thank the gentleman for raising this issue, and if the general would look into this in depth and report back to the committee, in addition to Mr. Deutch, we would very much require that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield
Thank
back.
you, Congressman.